One thing that's become commonplace in Doctor Who in recent years is story arcs. It's certainly something I would want to do a video on at some point, but would require a lot of rewatching of New Who, which in some cases, such as Series 7, would be rather exhausting. However, I thought it would be a good idea to look at the story arcs from Classic Who and look at the ways in which they work and see an alternate way of handling story arcs in Doctor Who. First off, they are pretty rare, and some seasons are very debatable as to whether they actually are story arcs, but for the purposes of this video, I have decided to count seasons 12, 16 and 23 as having an arc. I know many people would disagree with the inclusion of season 12, but while it certainly could be more accurately described as a season of stories which are very loosely interconnected, I'm counting it for the sake of variety. Without further ado, let's get into it. The arc in season 12 revolves around an actual arc. Well, Nova Beacon to be precise, but you get the picture. It begins in the arc in space when the crew land on a survival beacon where humans are hibernating to avoid a catastrophe. After that story, it follows on to the Sontaran experiment when the Doctor beams down from Nova to fix the transmat, which then follows on to Genesis of the Daleks where the Time Lords pull a mid-transmat to destroy the Daleks, which then leads into the Doctor returning to Nova in its past to revenge of the Cybermen. There's not a whole lot to say about this admittedly, as it's pretty basic, and as I said earlier, isn't really a fully fledged story arc. But the point is, something simple like this serves to give each story a more natural transition into the next, and it certainly gives the season a very distinct feel, which is sometimes quite nice. The sense of adventure is also heightened somewhat as they end up travelling for a while without the TARDIS, which makes the crew feel more vulnerable and exposed, hence increasing that sense of exploration that was only consistently pervasive in the early period of the show. I would certainly want to see more like this in the future, as it gave the season a certain cohesion that has never really been repeated to this extent since. Otherwise known as the Key to Time, Season 16 tells the story of the Doctor and Romana finding the pieces of the Key to Time scattered throughout the universe as requested by the White Guardian. Again, the arc really seems to assist the sense of adventure, which is at its best here since the 60s. I think this might be because the arc means that they were limited to only having one story on Earth, as it obviously wouldn't make sense to have all of the parts on the same planet. If you think about it, in almost all of Doctor Who, there is a complete overabundance of Earth-based stories in each season, so to have a whole one where there is only one story set here really allows the creativity to thrive. There are 5 different worlds visited in this season, and they're all well built and interesting, even in the really shit episodes, and it's this sole factor which heightens the sense of adventure and makes it an almost magical watch at times. Beyond that, I like the sense of purpose the TARDIS crew are given in this season. Obviously, it's great to sometimes have some aimless wandering through the universe with no idea as to where the TARDIS crew will end up next, but occasionally this element does work. It throws a bit more tension into the mix too, as not only does the Doctor have to resolve some kind of issue, he also needs to find the Key to Time segment as well. A quest mon might call it, and if you know me, I'm a big fan of quest stories like the Keys of Marinus. Overall, I think the story arc here succeeds. It has a positive effect on the feel of the season, as well as the settings for all these episodes, as well as having a good twist at the end while still allowing each story to function in its own right. The Trial of a Time Lord. Yes, this is an odd one. Personally, I consider it 4 separate stories with an arc that ties them together, like the Key to Time. However, I know many, as well as the title sequences of the episodes themselves, consider it to be one story. But for me, my way just makes more sense due to the differing writers and focus of each serial within the season. I know some will disagree with me there, but this is a rather divisive season in general. Personally, however, I quite like it. For those of you who don't know the arc of this season, it is that the Doctor is put on trial by the Time Lords and his guilt is judged by sequences of the Doctor's past played on screen in the court, essentially being a Doctor Who story within a Doctor Who story. It's a very interesting structure, and the transitions from sequence to courtroom drama, for the most part, pretty natural. And I must say, it's a lot of fun to watch the Doctor and the Valeyard comment over the sequences and criticise it. I'm not sure if it's intentional, but it almost seems like a parody of the audience who watch the show. This obviously has a more profound effect on the stories within it than the previous 2 story arcs we've talked about, as it effectively changes the nature of the way in which the stories are told, which is unique among all of Doctor Who. Even if you dislike it, I think we should all admit that such an experimentative change to the formula now and again is a good thing, as long as it's not done too often. And for that, I really respect the Trial of a Time Lord for all its shortcomings. And there we have it, a quick overview of the Classic Who story arcs. Just before this ends, I think I'd like to make comment on a few things that we have discussed in this video in contrast to the story arcs of New Who. Notice the common good things about these Classic Who story arcs is that the stories within it are still easy to watch out of context, and it has little bearing on the story itself other than Trial of a Time Lord, of course. They also break the mould, giving the seasons a different feel, and most importantly, it's not done too often. My main issues with the New Who story arcs, which I won't go into too much depth here as I can make a whole video out of it, is that it feels the need to do it every year, which rather than breaking the mould, feels stale. This is especially apparent with the latest one, which was the Hybrid. It basically went unresolved and added nothing to the series other than frustration. It's almost like they're doing them for the sake of doing them. Another complaint is how intrusive they are. Obviously the intrusivity is the point of Trial of a Time Lord, and it's just a one-off, but when nearly every season there's really good stories that are meant to be watched only in the context of the story arc, it begins to get annoying. Good examples of this are Heaven Sent and Time of Angels / Flesh and Stone. They're really good stories, but having to watch them in the context of the story arc, when they could have worked perfectly well without them, really distracts from the stories themselves and is quite annoying, especially when the arc is a big disappointment like the Hybrid. To summarise, please tone the story arcs down, New Who, after giving them a break. It's certainly a subject I'll have to return to though, as I have a lot more to say on New Who's story arcs and I have barely scratched the surface here. Until then, I hope you enjoyed and I'll see you back next time in another video.